"Get out of here. I didn't invite you." Those were the words that shattered me. My name is Susan Hale, and that night I was standing in the middle of my own living room, holding the back of a wooden chair I had polished just hours earlier. The table was set perfectly. The candles were lit. The smell of roasted chicken and homemade rolls filled the air. I had been awake since 5 in the morning, cooking for my daughter-in-law's birthday. Her name is Hannah. She turned 33 that day. When she walked into the room wearing a red dress and a smile that didn't reach her eyes, I thought she might thank me. Instead, she looked at me as if I were an intruder. "What are you doing here?" she asked. "Nobody called you. This is my party." At first, I thought she was joking. I glanced at my son, Ryan, sitting at the table beside her. He avoided my eyes, pretending to study his plate. The other guests fell silent, forks frozen in midair. The laughter that had filled the room moments ago evaporated. I just wanted to sit," I whispered. Hannah's lips curled into a sweet, practiced smile. She turned to her guests. "Please forgive the interruption," she said lightly. "You know how mothers can be always wanting to be in the middle of everything." A few people laughed, the kind of laugh that stings more than words. I was still standing there wearing my old apron, my hands trembling after 14 hours of work. I felt the weight of every year, every sacrifice pressing on my shoulders. The chair beneath my hand felt cold and foreign, like the house itself had turned against me. No one said a word to stop her, not my son, not anyone. The silence was so thick it felt alive. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears as I stepped back slowly, one shaky step at a time, toward the door. I reached for the doorknob. The metal was cold. I was about to leave quietly, to disappear from my own home without a word. But then, something inside me changed. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even sadness. It was something deeper, something that had been buried for years. I took a deep breath, and when I opened my eyes again, I was no longer the same woman who had spent her life being small and quiet. To understand how I got here, you need to know where it all began. I was born in a small town in northern Vermont where winters were long, and everyone knew each other's stories. My parents had 6 children, and I was the oldest. By the time I turned 15, I already knew how to cook, mend clothes, take care of babies, and keep the house running when my mother was too tired to move. They used to say I had steady hands, hands made for building a home. Maybe that's why I became a teacher later in life. I believed in building things, people, futures, families. At 21, I met Tom Hale, a carpenter with kind brown eyes and the calmest voice I'd ever heard. He didn't talk much, but when he did, people listened. We married 3 months later in a tiny church filled with wildflowers from the field behind our house. Tom built us a small cottage on Maple Ridge Road. The first thing he made for me wasn't a table or a bed, it was a rocking chair. He said, "You'll need this one day when we have children. You'll hold our baby here." I laughed, thinking how far away that sounded. A year later, Ryan was born. I remember the way Tom looked at him like he was holding the whole world in his arms. We weren't rich, not even close, but our home was warm, full of laughter and the smell of pine from Tom's workshop. Then, one spring morning, everything changed. Tom was working on a construction site when the scaffolding collapsed. They told me he died instantly. I remember holding Ryan, only 6 years old, while he asked, "Mom, when's Daddy coming home?" I couldn't answer. The world had gone quiet. We had no savings, no plan, just this house and my determination to keep it. I took on every job I could find, tutoring after school, cleaning houses on weekends, selling homemade bread at the farmer's market. I slept little, worked endlessly, and saved every penny in a coffee can under the sink. 10 years later, that house was still ours. Every wall, every nail, every flower in the yard carried a piece of Tom and me. That little house was more than a roof. It was my life, my battle, and my victory. I thought nothing could take it from me. I was wrong. Ryan grew up to be everything I had hoped for: smart, kind, and hardworking. After college, he became a civil engineer and moved to the city, about an hour away from our little town. Every Sunday, he called me without fail. Sometimes he'd drive down for dinner, bringing flowers or fresh bread from the bakery he knew I liked. I used to tell my friends, "Ryan is my greatest achievement." I believed it. Then one Thanksgiving, he brought someone home. Her name was Hannah Brooks. She was 30, confident, and beautiful in the kind of effortless way that made you notice her the second she walked into a room. She worked in marketing, she said, and loved minimalist design. I didn't really know what that meant, but she seemed polite enough. When Ryan looked at her, I saw a light in his eyes I hadn't seen in years. He was in love. That was all I needed to know. 6 months later, they got married in my backyard under the maple tree Tom had planted decades ago. The ceremony was small, simple, and full of hope. I cooked everything myself, just like old times: homemade pies, roasted chicken, and the punch everyone always asked for. Hannah hugged me afterward and said, "Thank you, Susan. You're the kind of mother-in-law every woman wishes she had." I believed her. For a while, things were good. They came over for Sunday lunches. We laughed, cooked, and even planted flowers together. Hannah would ask me about recipes, about my teaching days, about Tom. I thought I'd found the daughter I never had. Then one evening, Ryan called. "Mom," he said carefully, "Hannah and I are looking for an apartment, but prices are crazy right now. Could we stay with you for a few months just until we save up?" How could I say no to my only son? Of course, I said. This house will always be yours. They moved in that weekend. I gave them my bedroom, the big one with the private bathroom, and moved my things into the small storage room down the hall. It's temporary, I told myself, just for a little while. At first it felt nice. The house was lively again. Hannah helped with dishes and sometimes brought home coffee for me after work, but soon, small comments began to appear like cracks in old paint. "Don't you think this kitchen feels outdated, Susan?" she'd ask casually. Or, maybe the table would look better on the other side of the room. I didn't mind. I thought she was trying to help. Then, one afternoon, I came home from the grocery store and found my living room completely rearranged. The rocking chair Tom built, the one that held my memories, my nights with Ryan as a baby, was gone. "Where's my chair?" I asked. "Oh, that old thing," Hannah said without looking up from her phone. "I put it in the garage. It didn't match the decor. You'll love the new sofa." That night, I sat in my little storage room staring at the blank wall. For the first time, my house didn't feel like mine. It felt like a place I was only allowed to visit. The weeks that followed blurred together. I told myself things would get better, that Hannah would warm up to me, that Ryan would notice how uncomfortable I was. But instead, the house began to change faster than I could keep up. New furniture arrived almost every week: sleek, modern, cold. The floral curtains Tom had hung for me were gone, replaced by white blinds that made the living room look like a hospital. Even the photos on the hallway shelf disappeared, replaced by Hannah's framed travel pictures. One morning I found my wedding portrait in a box marked "Donate." I stood there for a long time, holding the frame against my chest, trying to understand how love could be erased so quietly. Then came Hannah's birthday party. She had invited 20 people, friends from her office, her yoga class, and even her old college roommate. I spent 2 days cooking, baking, and cleaning. Ryan promised to help, but he got called into work. "You're the best, Mom," he said as he rushed out the door. "Hannah's lucky to have you." When the guests arrived, I greeted them with smiles and trays of food. Hannah floated around the room like she owned every inch of it, laughing loudly, clinking glasses, telling stories about her beautiful home. She didn't mention me once. As the evening went on, the music grew louder, the laughter sharper. I stayed in the kitchen washing dishes that didn't need washing, pretending not to hear. Then I noticed my seat at the table, my usual spot near the window, was gone. A vase of flowers stood there instead. When I quietly pulled out a chair from the end of the table, Hannah turned around. "Oh," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Susan, why don't you go rest? You've been on your feet all day." "I'd like to sit for a bit," I said softly. Her smile tightened. "You've done enough already. This is my night." "I just wanted to be part of it," I whispered. Her voice rose, slicing through the chatter. "Get out of here, I didn't invite you." The room went silent. Every eye turned toward me. I felt heat rise up my neck, my face burning. Ryan looked down at his plate, motionless. No one said a word. For a moment I couldn't breathe. The smell of candles and perfume mixed into something bitter. My knees trembled, and the plate in my hand clattered against the counter. I wanted to cry, to shout, to disappear. But instead I walked to the sink, turned on the faucet, and let the cold water run over my hands until they stopped shaking. That night something inside me broke, but in that quiet breaking something else began to form, something stronger. The morning after the party, the house was quiet but not peaceful. It was the kind of silence that hummed beneath your skin, waiting to explode. I cleaned up the mess alone, empty glasses, stained napkins, half-eaten cake, and tried not to think about the look on Ryan's face when I was told to leave. He hadn't defended me, not once. Hannah came downstairs around noon, wearing a silk robe and holding her phone. "The party was great," she said without looking at me. "Everyone loved the food. Next time maybe we'll get a caterer though. You look tired." I nodded, keeping my voice steady. I was. For weeks I moved through the house like a ghost. I stayed in my small room, kept to my corner of the kitchen, and avoided any conversation that could lead to another argument. Ryan was always busy, and Hannah filled the silence with her plans: new paint colors, new furniture, a new life that no longer seemed to include me. One afternoon, I overheard them talking in the living room. Hannah's voice was low but sharp. "We can't live like this forever, Ryan. Your mother's house is falling apart. We should sell and get something better. Something ours." I pressed my hand against the wall to steady myself. Ryan sighed. "It's her home, Hannah." "She'll understand," she said. "We'll tell her it's best for everyone." That night I couldn't sleep. I sat on the edge of my bed, listening to the clock tick, every second pounding in my chest. For years I had built my life around caring for others: Tom, Ryan, my students. I never asked for much. I never fought back. But now, even my memories were being taken away from me. A few days later, I was walking in the yard when my neighbor, Nancy Miller, leaned over the fence. She was watering her tulips and noticed the dark circles under my eyes. "You look tired, Susan," she said gently. "You okay?" I hesitated, then told her everything. She listened without interrupting, then said something that stayed with me forever. "It's one thing to be lonely when you're alone," she said. "It's worse when you're surrounded by people who don't see you." That night, I realized she was right. I wasn't living. I was disappearing. And I was done letting that happen. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the kitchen window, hitting the floorboards Tom had laid decades ago. I stood there barefoot, holding my cup of coffee, staring at the empty space where my rocking chair used to be. Dust gathered in the corner, but all I could see was the ghost of what once was Tom sanding the wood, Ryan taking his first steps beside it, me rocking him to sleep on stormy nights. Something inside me clicked. I poured out the coffee, wiped my hands, and walked straight to the garage. It smelled of paint and cardboard, the air heavy with things forgotten. And there, behind stacks of boxes labeled "Donate," was the chair. My chair. The one Hannah said didn't match the decor. I dragged it back into the living room, my arms aching, but my heart lighter than it had been in years. When I set it down, it made a deep, solid sound against the floor. It felt like the house itself took a breath. Hannah came downstairs a few minutes later, holding her laptop. "What's this doing here?" she demanded. "I told you." I didn't let her finish. "It belongs here," I said. My voice was calm, steady. "So do I." She blinked, surprised. "Excuse me?" "You heard me. This is my home. I'm done pretending otherwise." For the first time since she moved in, Hannah didn't have a ready answer. She just stood there, mouth slightly open, as if the words didn't fit inside the version of me she'd built in her head. Later that day, I moved my clothes back into my old bedroom. I changed the sheets, opened the curtains, and let the air in. It smelled like lilac and freedom. When Ryan came home, he noticed right away. "Mom, what's going on?" he asked, confused. "I'm just taking back what's mine," I said simply. Hannah stormed out, muttering something about me being impossible. Ryan followed her, torn between us, but I didn't chase after him. Not this time. That night, for the first time in months, I sat in my chair, rocking gently, listening to the creak of the wood and the quiet hum of the house. I realized I didn't need anyone's permission to exist in my own home. I had been invisible for too long, but now I was beginning to see myself again. The shift was subtle at first, like the quiet before a storm. Hannah no longer shouted or rolled her eyes when I walked into a room. Instead, she smiled that thin, polite smile people use when they've already decided you're irrelevant. She stopped talking to me altogether, except to give short commands where to move things, what to buy from the store, what not to touch. But the difference now was that I didn't listen. I cooked only for myself. I cleaned only my space. When she left dishes piled in the sink, I ignored them. When she made snide remarks about my old-fashioned habits, I smiled and said, "You're welcome to do things your way." That drove her crazy. One evening I overheard her on the phone, her voice sharp and impatient. "Yes, I want to sell the property," she said. "The market's perfect right now. My husband's name is on the mail, so it won't be an issue. We'll get the paperwork started." My heart stopped for a second. I set down my tea and listened. She was planning to sell my home. The next morning, I went downtown and met with a lawyer named Mr. Jacobs. I brought every document I had: old mortgage statements, tax receipts, even Tom's death certificate. He examined them carefully, then nodded. "Mrs. Hale," he said, "this house is in your name only. Your son has no legal claim to it." I felt tears sting my eyes. Relief. Validation. Power. 2 days later, Hannah showed up with a real estate agent. They were both dressed sharply, the agent carrying a camera and a clipboard. "We'll take some photos today," Hannah said, all confidence. "Make sure the lights are on." I blocked the doorway. "No one takes pictures in my house." She frowned. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," I said. "You don't own this place. You don't even belong here." The agent shifted awkwardly. "Maybe we should come back another time." Hannah's face turned red. "Ryan will hear about this," she snapped. "Good," I said. "He should." When they finally left, I stood in the hallway, my hands still trembling, but it wasn't fear anymore. It was strength. For the first time in years, I felt the ground beneath me again. The power had shifted, and this time it was mine to keep. Hannah didn't waste any time. That evening, she cornered Ryan in the kitchen, her voice low but sharp enough for me to hear from the next room. "She's impossible, Ryan. We can't keep living like this. Either she goes or I do." There it was, the ultimatum, the same tactic people use when they know they're losing control. Ryan didn't answer right away. I could hear the weight in his silence, the same silence that had followed me through every argument, every insult, every tear I swallowed just to keep the peace. Finally, he said quietly, "Hannah, this is my mother's house. She's not going anywhere." Her voice rose. "You're choosing her over me." "I'm choosing what's right." The sound of a suitcase dragging across the floor echoed through the house a few minutes later. Hannah stormed upstairs, grabbed her clothes, and slammed the bedroom door so hard that the picture frames rattled on the wall. When she came back down, she looked straight at me, her eyes full of venom and disbelief. "You'll regret this," she hissed. I didn't answer. I just stepped aside and opened the front door. Ryan followed her to the driveway, trying one last time to reason with her, but she wouldn't even look back. When the car finally disappeared down the road, the house fell silent again. For the first time in months, that silence didn't feel heavy. It felt like peace. Ryan stood in the doorway, his face pale. "I didn't want it to end like this," he said. "I know," I told him softly, "but sometimes endings are the only way to start again." He nodded, and without another word he went upstairs. I stayed in the living room, alone, and sat down in my rocking chair. The evening light spilled through the window, painting the floor with gold. I closed my eyes and listened to the quiet hum of the house, the creak of the wood, the whisper of the wind through the curtains. For the first time in years, it sounded like home again. 6 months passed. The house was peaceful again, too peaceful sometimes. I filled my days with small routines: tending the garden, reading on the porch, sharing coffee with Nancy in the mornings. The air felt lighter, as if the house itself had exhaled after years of holding its breath. One rainy afternoon, I was baking bread when I heard a knock at the door. When I opened it, Ryan stood there, soaked from the storm, holding a bundle wrapped in a blanket. It wasn't until he shifted the blanket that I realized it was a baby. "Her name's Lily," he said softly. "She's 2 months old." I stepped aside, and he came in. The house smelled like yeast and cinnamon. For a moment it felt like time had folded in on itself, like the years between us had disappeared. "What happened?" I asked gently. "Hannah left," he said. "She took her things and disappeared 3 weeks ago. I tried to call, but..." His voice cracked. "She's gone, Mom." I looked at my son, the boy who once played with wooden cars on this very floor, and saw the man he'd become, worn and tired, but still the same heart deep down. I placed my hand on his shoulder. "You're not alone," I said. He nodded, tears shining in his eyes. "Can we stay for a while? Just until I figure things out." I smiled faintly. "You and Lily are always welcome here," but Ryan, I hesitated before continuing. "Things will be different this time. I won't lose myself again. Not for anyone." He understood. "You won't have to." That night, as the storm eased, I rocked Lily in the same chair her grandfather built decades ago. Her tiny fingers wrapped around mine, and I whispered, "Welcome home, sweetheart." For the first time, the word home felt whole again. The weeks that followed felt like spring after a long winter. The house was no longer filled with tension, but with the small sounds of life: Lily's soft coos, the kettle whistling, the faint hum of Ryan's lullabies when he thought no one was listening. He had changed. I could see it in the way he moved, the way he spoke. Gone was the man who once looked through me. Now he looked to me for guidance, for warmth, for something he had almost lost. One morning he found me repainting the kitchen walls. "Yellow?" he asked with a teasing smile. "Yellow," I said, "like it used to be." He laughed, helping me roll the paint, and for the first time in years, laughter echoed in that house without bitterness. We talked for hours about everything we'd avoided about his father, about the past, about the mistakes we both made. "Mom," he said finally, his voice low, "I know I can't undo what happened, but I want to make it right." I looked at him, really looked, and felt something soften inside me. "You already are, Ryan." Later that evening, I sat in my rocking chair with Lily in my arms, the sun setting outside the window. The golden light poured into the room, and I thought about everything that had brought me here: the pain, the silence, the defiance, the rediscovery of who I was. I realized then that this story had never been about revenge. It was about reclamation. About remembering that losing yourself for love isn't love at all. About standing your ground, not out of anger, but out of respect for yourself, for your life, for your peace. I looked down at Lily. She blinked up at me, calm and curious, and I smiled. "One day," I whispered, "you'll have your own battles. Just promise me this: never let anyone make you small in your own home." The house was quiet again, but not empty. It was alive with laughter, with light, and with everything I had fought so hard to keep. Months passed, and the rhythm of my life settled into something peaceful, something true. Each morning I opened the curtains to let the light spill in, brewed 2 cups of coffee, one for me, one for Ryan, and watched Lily grow stronger, brighter, happier. The house no longer echoed with bitterness or shame. It breathed again. The floorboards creaked softly under my steps, the lemon tree in the garden began to bloom, and for the first time in decades, I felt safe inside my own walls. People in town sometimes asked how I managed to forgive so much. I never had an easy answer. Forgiveness, I realized, isn't about letting others off the hook, it's about freeing yourself from the weight they put on you. It's not forgetting the pain, it's choosing not to carry it any longer. One afternoon, Nancy stopped by with her usual cheerful grin and a basket of scones. "So," she said, eyeing Lily asleep in her crib, "what's next for you, Susan Hale?" I laughed. "Next? I think I'll just live." She nodded knowingly. "You've earned that." After she left, I sat by the window, the one facing the garden. The sunlight flickered through the leaves, and a soft breeze carried the smell of earth and lemons inside. I thought of everything that had happened: how easily love can blur into control, how silence can turn into survival, and how courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's just the quiet decision to stay standing. I picked up my old photo album, the one I hadn't opened in years. There was Ryan as a boy, covered in paint, Tom holding me on the porch, the life I built, the love I lost, the strength I found. I smiled. If anyone had told me that I'd find peace not in revenge, but in reclaiming myself, I might not have believed them. But as I watched the sunset turn the kitchen walls golden, I finally understood: sometimes the greatest victory isn't making others pay. It's learning you were enough all along. If there's one thing my story has taught me, it's this: no matter how deep the hurt, how long you've been overlooked, or how much of yourself you've given away, it is never too late to take your life back. For years, I believed love meant sacrifice. That being a good mother meant staying quiet, giving, and never asking for anything in return. But silence only teaches people how to ignore you. It took losing everything: my pride, my space, my voice, to realize that love without respect isn't love at all. And the day I finally stood up for myself, I didn't lose my family. I found me. So if you're listening right now and you feel trapped, unseen, or forgotten, I want you to know this: you are not weak for wanting peace. You are not selfish for protecting your boundaries. You are not wrong for saying no. Your voice matters, your life matters, and sometimes reclaiming your power doesn't start with grand gestures, it starts with a whisper, a choice, a single moment when you decide you've had enough. Because that's how healing begins. It's not about revenge, it's about freedom, about standing tall in your truth, even if it means standing alone for a while. So wherever you are, whatever your story looks like, choose yourself. And if Susan Hale's story touched you, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and tell us in the comments what would you do if someone tried to take away your peace. Because here on The Art of Revenge, we don't just tell stories of pain, we tell stories of strength, of rediscovery, of taking back the life that was always yours to begin with.